I wish you were dead, Dad. The words sliced through the air like broken glass. They hung there, trembling, refusing to fade, sharp enough to cut even the silence that followed. Jeremiah Cole, 70 years old, stood in the middle of his own living room, still wearing the soft grey cardigan his late wife had knitted years ago. The afternoon light from the wide windows fell unevenly across his face, catching on the lines carved deep into his skin, not from age but from restraint. His short grey beard trembled slightly when he exhaled. Across from him stood Marcus, his 32-year-old son, his chest rising and falling with rage. He was handsome in the way youth often is, sharp haircut, new sneakers, a watch that gleamed too bright, but his eyes burned with a kind of anger that made him look older, uglier, emptier. Between them, the air felt like it might shatter. "You think I'm going to live my whole life stuck taking care of you?" Marcus barked. "You sit here doing nothing, expecting me to serve you like I'm your damn butler." Jeremiah didn't answer. He didn't even blink. His silence was his weapon, always had been. It was the same silence that used to humble men twice Marcus's age, back when Jeremiah ran his own construction firm. But now to Marcus it only looked like weakness. "You hear me, old man?" Marcus shouted again, pacing the room. "You ain't a boss anymore. You're just a burden." He grabbed the half-empty plate of food off the table, the one Jeremiah hadn't finished, and threw it against the wall. The plate shattered, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the house. A piece of cornbread slid down the paint. Silence followed again, heavy, painful, endless. Jeremiah finally spoke, his voice calm and low. "You done?" Marcus froze for a second. The calmness made him angrier. "Yeah, I'm done. Done with this house. Done with pretending I owe you anything." He stepped closer, close enough for Jeremiah to smell the alcohol on his breath. "You had your time, old man. It's mine now," he pointed toward the front door. "Get out." Jeremiah's hand tightened slightly around his cane. His jaw set, but he said nothing. The storm was inside him, unseen, and maybe that's what made it stronger. "You heard me," Marcus spat, his voice breaking now between fury and desperation. "Get out of my house." That word, "my," was what finally broke something inside Jeremiah. He looked around the room slowly, the walls he had painted with his own hands, the bookshelf he built for his wife, the faded couch that still smelled faintly of her perfume. Everything here was memory, his life laid bare. And yet in this moment he was a stranger inside it. He nodded once. No argument, no pleading, just quiet acceptance and something else beneath it. Something like sorrow turning to stone. He bent down, picked up his worn leather satchel from beside the couch, and walked toward the door. Marcus called after him, voice trembling but cruel. "That's right. Take your pity walk. Maybe you'll find a park bench somewhere that misses you." Jeremiah paused at the door. He turned his head just enough for the light to catch his eyes. "You sure about this, son?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "I've never been more sure." Jeremiah looked at him for a long moment, long enough for Marcus to shift uncomfortably, though he wouldn't admit why. Then the old man nodded once and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The sound of that door shutting was quiet, but it was final. Outside, the sky was turning red, the last light of day falling behind the houses on Rosewood Street. The world felt smaller somehow. Jeremiah stood still for a long while on the porch, his hand resting on the wooden rail, his breath steadying itself. He looked down the street, the neighborhood he'd helped build years ago. Back then, every brick, every fence, every porch light had meant something. Now it all looked unfamiliar. He walked slowly toward the gate, the gravel crunching under his old shoes. A woman across the street, Mrs. Patterson, who'd known him since his wife's funeral, stepped outside with her dog. "Mr. Cole?" she called softly. "You all right?" Jeremiah gave a small nod. "Just getting some air, ma'am." Her eyes fell on the small satchel in his hand. She knew that look, the quiet kind of exile that didn't need explaining. "If you need anything, sugar, you just—" "Thank you." "But I'm fine," and he was, in a way only a man who's already lost everything can be fine. He walked past the rusted mailbox, down the sidewalk that led toward town. The wind tugged at his cardigan, the evening air cool and sharp. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A text. He stopped under a streetlight and pulled it out. From Attorney Lewis. "The final draft of the property transfer is ready. Mr. Cole, need your signature tonight if you want it processed tomorrow. Jeremiah looked up toward the sky, the first star breaking through the dusk. His eyes glimmered faintly in the pale light. He typed back one word, "On my way." Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket, took a deep breath and kept walking. The night grew quiet as he reached Main Street. Most of the shops were closing, neon signs flickering out one by one. His reflection followed him in the windows. A tired old man, shoulders heavy with silence, but eyes that still held something sharp, something unfinished. He stopped in front of the law office, Lewis and Banks, attorneys at law. The lights inside were still on. When he entered, the bell above the door gave a faint chime. "Mr. Cole," said a man in a dark suit looking up from a stack of papers. "Right on time." Jeremiah nodded and took a seat. The lawyer slid a single document across the table, thick paper, gold seal, and a pen placed neatly on top. "This will finalize the ownership change. Once you sign, the property transfers completely." Jeremiah studied the paper for a long while. His fingers hovered over the pen. His face didn't change, calm, unreadable, but his heart beat slow and deliberate like the sound of distant thunder. "Everything we discussed?" he asked quietly. "Exactly as you instructed, sir." Jeremiah nodded once. Then he signed. As the ink settled into the paper, something inside him shifted. Not relief, not revenge, but something colder. Like closure dressed in silence, he placed the pen down gently and said, "Make sure it's processed first thing tomorrow." Of course, Jeremiah stood, thanked the lawyer and left. Outside, the wind had turned colder. He looked up one last time at the house barely visible at the end of the street. A home that was no longer his. He whispered under his breath, "May the roof hold strong, even when the heart beneath it doesn't." Then he turned away, his figure swallowed by the night, walking towards something unseen, something certain. The stage was set. Tomorrow the silence would speak louder than any curse his son had ever thrown. The night had settled heavy over Rosewood Street. Streetlights buzzed faintly, their halos blurred by mist that crawled low along the pavement. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once and went silent again. Inside the house, his house now, Marcus Cole sat on the living room couch, one arm draped lazily over the backrest, a glass of bourbon in his hand. The room was still thick with the smell of what had happened earlier, the faint bitterness of spilled food. The sharp tang of anger that lingered even after shouting stopped. He looked at the dent in the wall where the plate had hit, and for a brief second, the image of his father standing there, still patient, unbroken, flickered across his mind like a ghost refusing to leave. He shook it off. "He'll get over it," Marcus muttered to himself. "He always does." He took another sip, grimaced, and leaned back. The fire in the fireplace had died hours ago, leaving behind cold ash and silence, but Marcus didn't relight it. He didn't need warmth, he told himself that much. The house was his now, finally, and yet something about it felt wrong. Too still, too quiet. He turned on the television just for the noise, flipping channels aimlessly until the hum of late-night talk shows filled the air. Laughter from strangers poured into the living room, bouncing off the empty chairs and echoing through the hallway. But the sound didn't make the house feel alive. It only reminded him how alone he was in it. Meanwhile, across town, Jeremiah Cole was sitting in the back booth of a small 24-hour diner near the highway. The kind of place where the coffee was burnt but always hot, and the waitresses still called you hon. He sat with a cup in front of him, steam curling up in soft, steady ribbons. His satchel rested beside him, the signed document safely inside. He wasn't eating. He wasn't really even thinking, just existing in that quiet space where pain had already burned itself out and left only calm behind. The radio hummed low in the background, some old soul song that spoke of heartbreak and time. "You sure you don't want a refill, Mr. Cole?" asked Grace, the waitress, her voice kind and tired. "No, ma'am," he said gently. "I'm good right here." She smiled, but her eyes lingered on him a moment longer. Something about his posture, his silence, told her not to ask further questions. He watched the rain outside streak down the windows. The world had turned grey, and for the first time in a long while he felt at peace with it. He had made the call. Signed the paper. The rest would come. By the next morning the world moved as if nothing had changed. But inside Marcus's house things were beginning to shift, quietly like an earthquake deep beneath the ground. It started small. The electricity flickered, twice. Marcus frowned, tapping the remote against his palm. Come on, man. Not today, the light returned, but weaker. He didn't think much of it. He went to the kitchen, poured himself coffee, and stood by the counter scrolling his phone. Dozens of unread notifications blinked across the screen, most from the bank, a few from his job, one from his ex-girlfriend asking if he'd finally apologized to the old man. He ignored all of them. He'll be fine, Marcus muttered again. Probably back by evening, begging for another chance to stay, but deep down a small sliver of doubt gnawed at him. His father wasn't the kind of man who begged. Not once in Marcus's 32 years had he ever seen Jeremiah plead for anything. When life hit hard, Jeremiah just worked harder. When people insulted him, he just looked at them until they stopped talking. If Jeremiah had left without a word, that meant something. Marcus set his phone down, uneasy. Then the house phone rang. He let it ring 3 times before answering, his voice groggy. Yeah? A polite but firm voice spoke on the other end. Good morning. This is First State Bank. May I speak with Mr. Jeremiah Cole? He's not here anymore. I'm his son. What's this about? I see. And you are Marcus Cole? Yeah. Mr. Cole, are you aware there were recent account changes filed late last night? Marcus blinked. Account changes? What changes? There was a pause. I'm afraid we can't disclose details without proper authorization, but it appears a full ownership transfer was completed. You may want to speak with your father directly regarding joint account access. The line clicked dead before Marcus could respond. He stared at the receiver for a long time. A nervous laugh escaped his throat. He wouldn't. But Jeremiah would. Jeremiah didn't threaten. He didn't warn. He just did. By mid-afternoon, Marcus was pacing the living room. He tried logging into the joint savings account his father had once created for family emergencies. The one Marcus had quietly started using for his own lifestyle. New watch, weekend trips, fancy car payments, password invalid. He tried again. And again. Account inaccessible. He sat down slowly, the air in his lungs thick and heavy. Something inside him shifted. Not fear exactly, but a creeping recognition that his father's silence might not have been surrender. He grabbed his jacket and keys, storming out the door. At that same moment, Jeremiah was standing outside his late wife's old church, the one he'd helped paint decades ago. The white siding had chipped, but the stained glass still caught the morning sun beautifully. Pastor Williams was there, waiting by the door. Jeremiah, he said with a warm smile. Got your message. Everything set? Everything's done, Jeremiah replied softly. I just want it handled quietly. And your boy? Jeremiah hesitated, looking out over the quiet street. He's got to learn what hunger feels like before he ever understands what grace means. The pastor nodded slowly. Then may the Lord let him learn it quick. Jeremiah smiled faintly, not cruelly, but like a man who'd already said his prayers and left the rest to time. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded check and handed it over. For the community kitchen. Feed whoever comes hungry tomorrow. You sure, Jeremiah? I'm sure. He turned to leave, his cane tapping softly against the church steps. The morning wind caught the edge of his cardigan, and for a brief second it almost looked like a cape. Not of a hero, but of a man walking away from everything that used to bind him. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, Marcus's car rolled into his father's neighborhood. His expression was a mix of anger and confusion. The street looked the same, peaceful, warm, alive, but his gut twisted the closer he got to that familiar iron gate. He parked, stepped out, and froze. The front yard was freshly swept. The porch light glowed golden. And there, sitting calmly on the porch, was Jeremiah. A plate of food sat beside him untouched. Marcus swallowed hard and stepped forward. Dad, we need to talk. Jeremiah didn't move, didn't blink, just looked up slowly, his calm eyes reflecting the fading light. Marcus took another step, his voice cracking slightly. I went to the bank. They said. Jeremiah raised a hand, just one, and the younger man stopped mid-sentence. You hungry, son? Jeremiah asked quietly. Marcus frowned, unsure how to answer. Because tomorrow, Jeremiah said, his voice low and even, you'll understand what that really means. The gate between them stood still. the air humming with something unseen. And somewhere in that quiet, somewhere between pride and fear, Marcus finally realized his father's silence had never meant defeat. It had always been the sound of judgment coming. The morning came quiet, almost too quiet. The birds that usually sang outside the coal house had gone still, the air heavy and grey before the sun even rose. A thin fog hung low over the yard, swallowing the street beyond the gate. Inside, Marcus Cole woke up on the couch, head pounding, the half-empty bourbon bottle on the floor beside him. His phone buzzed faintly under his hand. He groaned, rubbed his face and reached for it. Notification bank app. Account temporarily frozen. Please contact your branch. He sat up fast, staring at the screen, blinking hard as if it might change the words. He opened the app, refreshed it once, twice, 3 times. Same message. No, 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 he muttered. That can't be right. He tried the credit card app. Same thing. Account access suspended. The air in his chest tightened. His throat felt dry. He jumped to his feet, pacing the room. This has to be some kind of glitch. But deep down, the part of him that had once watched his father in silence, the part that knew Jeremiah didn't make mistakes, that part whispered no. It's not a glitch. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out the front door. Still barefoot, still half drunk with panic. The fog met him on the steps like a wall. He ran down the walkway, the gate creaking open with a sound that almost mocked him. The neighborhood was quiet. Only one house down the street had its lights on, Mrs. Patterson's. She stood on her porch, robe wrapped around her, watching him with that same mixture of pity and curiosity that small towns specialize in. "Morning, Marcus," she called softly. "You seen my father?" He snapped. "Saw him yesterday. Looked well," she hesitated. "You all right, baby?" "You look like you seen a ghost." Marcus didn't answer. He was already halfway down the street, moving faster now, anger swallowing his fear. Meanwhile, at the far end of town, Jeremiah Cole was sitting outside a corner cafe. His breakfast sat untouched. Black coffee, 1 biscuit, nothing more. He wore a simple brown jacket, the same kind he used to wear when driving Marcus to school decades ago. His eyes were fixed on the morning paper. The headline wasn't important. The act of reading, the stillness of it, was across from him sat Leroy, his lawyer, the same man who'd handled last night's document. "Everything went through this morning," Leroy said, sipping his coffee. "All the accounts. Transfers complete. And the business, yours again, officially. The board reinstated your authority after you made that payment. They'll inform Marcus this afternoon." Jeremiah nodded. "Good." Leroy leaned back, studying him. "Are you sure you don't want to tell him yourself?" "No," Jeremiah said quietly. "Some lessons don't come from words." He folded the newspaper, placed it on the table and looked out over the street. The sunlight was beginning to burn through the fog, casting faint gold on the asphalt. "Let the day teach him," Jeremiah murmured. "It's a better teacher than I ever was." Back at the house, Marcus's morning went from confusion to chaos. He'd driven to the bank by 8:30 a.m., still wearing the same clothes as the night before. The parking lot was half full. He stormed through the glass doors, his voice already tight with impatience. "I need to speak with someone right now," he barked to the teller. "Of course, sir. May I have your name?" "Marcus Cole," the woman typed into her computer, her brow furrowing slightly. "Mr. Cole, I'm afraid your name no longer appears as an authorized user on any of the accounts associated with Mr. Jeremiah Cole." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "That's my money." She gave a professional smile, practiced for angry customers. "I understand this is frustrating, sir, but the ownership was legally transferred. You may want to contact your father directly." He slammed his hand on the counter. "You don't understand. I live in that house." "Then I suggest you talk to the new property owner, sir." Her words hit him like a slap. "What did you just say?" "The deed was updated this morning." Marcus stood there, mouth open, staring at her like she'd just spoken another language. He turned and stormed out, the automatic doors hissing shut behind him. The bright daylight felt too harsh, too revealing. His reflection in the glass looked nothing like the man he thought he was. Disheveled, desperate, small. He drove aimlessly for an hour. No direction, no plan, and just motion. The streets blurred. He kept seeing his father's face every time he blinked, calm, still, unbothered. The memory made his hands tremble on the steering wheel. By the time he got back home, his car was nearly out of gas. He parked crookedly, slammed the door, and marched toward the house. Inside, the silence greeted him again. But this time it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. The lights flickered once, then went dark. He tried the switch, nothing. He checked the kitchen faucet. No water. The utilities had been transferred too. He stumbled backward, clutching his head. No, this can't be happening. He wouldn't do this. He couldn't, but he could. Jeremiah Cole didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't throw hands. When Jeremiah Cole was done with you, he erased you, quietly, completely. Late that afternoon, Marcus drove back to his father's old property, the same one he'd thrown him out of. The iron gate was closed now, locked from the inside. He could see movement on the porch. Jeremiah sitting calmly again, this time with a ledger book on his lap. The old man looked peaceful, too peaceful for the chaos that was tearing through Marcus's chest. Marcus shouted from the gate, his voice cracking. "Dad, what did you do?" Jeremiah looked up slowly. No anger, no smile. Just those same deep eyes that had seen too much to ever be shaken again. "I signed what needed signing," Jeremiah said simply. Marcus gripped the bars, shaking them. "You can't just take everything." "You left me with nothing." Jeremiah's voice didn't rise. "Son, I didn't take anything from you. You threw it away." The silence after that line hit harder than any yell could have. Even the wind seemed to stop. Marcus stared, his mouth open, but no words came out. The gate, that same gate he'd once told his father to walk through, now stood between them unmovable. Jeremiah leaned back in his chair, watching him. "You called me a beggar once," he said softly. "But now look who's standing outside a gate asking for what he no longer owns." Marcus's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to scream, but the truth sat too heavy in his chest. Jeremiah looked down at the ledger again, flipping a page. "Go on home, son," he said finally. "Before the sun sets. It's going to be a long night." Marcus didn't move. He couldn't. The words sank deep. And for the first time in his life, he felt what his father's silence really meant. It wasn't weakness. It was power disguised as peace. He backed away slowly, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. For every step he took, the weight of his choices followed. Heavier than the money he'd lost, heavier than the pride he once flaunted. Inside the gate, Jeremiah exhaled deeply, looking out toward the street. His hands trembled slightly, not from regret but from release. He whispered under his breath, "One day you'll understand, Marcus. But for now, you'll have to eat your own pride before you ever taste mercy." He turned and went inside, the screen door closing with a soft click. Outside, Marcus stood alone on the sidewalk, silent, sweating, and scared, as the sun finally began to fall behind the house that used to be his. Tomorrow would come, but it would bring hunger, humility, and the kind of lesson only silence could teach. The morning came grey and silent, like the world itself was ashamed to look at him. Marcus hadn't slept. He had spent the entire night pacing, sweating, and clutching his empty stomach. The house that once felt too small for his pride now felt too big for his fear. Shadows stretched long across the wooden floors, and the silence was no longer peaceful. It was loud, accusing, unbearable. He opened the refrigerator again, though he already knew what waited there. Nothing but a half-spilled carton of milk and a jar of mustard. He stared at the empty shelves like they might suddenly fill up if he glared hard enough. His hands shook as he slammed the door shut, the echo bouncing off the walls of a house that no longer felt like home. He picked up his phone. Still no signal, no notifications, no messages, not even a spam email. He turned it off, then back on, as if that would somehow make the world care again. "Come on, man," he whispered. "Come on." He stumbled toward the front window. Outside, the neighborhood was alive. Kids waiting for the school bus, a mailman making his rounds, an old woman watering her plants. Life kept moving, indifferent to his fall. He spotted Mr. Jenkins, the landlord, across the street, talking to two men in suits. Marcus frowned, watching them point toward his house. His gut twisted. A knock came at the door. 3 short raps, firm, final. Marcus froze. For a second, hope flickered. Maybe it was a delivery. Maybe someone had finally sent help. But when he opened the door, the faces waiting there didn't carry mercy. "Morning," said one of the men, flashing a clipboard. "Marcus Cole?" "Yeah," he said cautiously. "You've been served." This property is under legal transfer. You're required to vacate immediately. Marcus blinked, the words barely registering. What? No, this is my house. My dad, Ownership changed yesterday, the man interrupted. Name on the deeds no longer yours. Papers are filed and cleared. You got an hour to gather your things. The second man handed him an envelope, then both turned and walked back toward their car. The envelope shook in Marcus's hands as he tore it open. Inside was a single document, stamped and sealed. Transfer of ownership, Jeremiah Cole. The ink was still fresh. His father's name at the bottom was calm, perfect, deliberate. Marcus's throat went dry. The house tilted around him. He tried to breathe, but it came out shallow, panicked. No, he wouldn't, he muttered. He wouldn't do this. But he had. He staggered to the couch, sat down and stared at the floor. The silence returned, but it was different now. It wasn't accusing anymore. It was laughing. He could almost hear his father's voice, quiet, steady, patient. That same silence Marcus once mocked now stood over him like judgment itself. His stomach growled again, low and painful. He clutched it with one hand and looked toward the kitchen. Nothing there but crumbs and broken pride. He thought about calling someone, anyone, but who was left? The friends who used to drink with him on Friday nights had stopped answering weeks ago. His co-workers. He'd quit his job months back after boasting about not needing anyone anymore. And now he needed everyone. Minutes turned into hours. The men came back, watched as Marcus stuffed a few shirts into a backpack and escorted him out. The sun was harsh by then, too bright for a man who'd fallen so far in a single day. He stood on the sidewalk barefoot, clutching his bag while the new lock clicked shut behind him. He walked. Nowhere in particular, just walked. His stomach ached, his throat dry, his pride cracking with every step. He passed the grocery store but couldn't go in. He had no wallet, no cards, nothing left in his bank. The screen of his phone glowed with the cruel truth. Account balance, 0.00. The people who used to greet him barely looked his way now. The same neighbors who once nodded politely were suddenly too busy with their gardens, their mail, their lives. Shame followed him like a shadow. By evening he reached a small park bench at the edge of town. Kids played nearby, laughter echoing like it belonged to a different world. He sank down slowly, pressing his palms to his eyes. For the first time in his life, Marcus cried quietly like his father once did, the kind of tears that come when a man finally understands his own sins. He stayed there until nightfall. His phone battery was dying, and so was his strength. The streetlights flickered on, casting him in pale orange. Then, in the distance, he saw it. The old gate, black iron and sturdy, standing in front of the house that had once been his father's. His legs moved before his pride could stop them. He walked one painful step after another, down the same road where he'd once shouted, "You're not my dad anymore." The wind carried the memory back to him, sharp and cruel. By the time he reached the gate, his hands were trembling. He hesitated, then knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, louder this time. "Dad," his voice broke on the word. "Dad, please." From inside the property, the porch light flickered on. A silhouette appeared in the doorway, tall, still, calm. Jeremiah Cole. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching. Marcus's breath came out in shallow gasps. "Please, I'm hungry. I got nowhere else to go." The night was cold. The wind carried dust across the path between them, but Jeremiah didn't step forward. His eyes, shadowed by the dim light, held no anger, just distance. A quiet kind of knowing. Marcus gripped the gate with both hands. "I'm sorry," he shouted. "I'm sorry, Dad." Still, Jeremiah said nothing. His face softened just slightly, but his silence remained, and in that silence Marcus broke. He slid down to his knees, sobbing against the metal bars like a man begging a god that would never answer. The same gate he once told his father to leave through now stood between him and mercy. Jeremiah turned away slowly, closing the door behind him. The porch light dimmed, and the night swallowed the sound of Marcus's cries. For the first time in his life, the son truly understood the weight of silence. Outside the gate, hunger gnawed, pride shattered, and the echo of his own cruelty returned to him, word for word. Tomorrow would come, but it would not bring forgiveness. It would only bring understanding. The night pressed down heavy on Marcus, wrapping him in a kind of quiet that felt alive, listening, judging. His body trembled where he sat against the cold iron gate, the same gate he once watched his father walk through in humiliation. Now it was his turn to sit outside it, unwanted, unseen. The street was almost empty. Only the flickering porch lights from nearby houses gave shape to the darkness. Dogs barked somewhere far off. A car passed slowly, and then there was nothing again, just the faint hum of the wind. Inside the yard, Jeremiah Cole's house stood calm and dark. Curtains drawn, front door closed. Not a sound. That silence was worse than shouting. Marcus had shouted enough for both of them in his lifetime, but tonight his voice had nothing left to give. His throat burned from crying, his body weak from hunger. He pressed his head against the gate and whispered, "Please, Dad, please." No answer. Only the creak of the trees above. He closed his eyes. For a moment, his mind played tricks on him. He thought he heard footsteps on the porch, the click of a door handle. He lifted his head quickly, eyes wide, but the porch was still empty. Just his imagination feeding on regret. A small sob slipped from his lips. He hated how pathetic it sounded. Once he was the man who could make others flinch with a single word. Now his own words dissolved into the night without meaning. His stomach growled again, painfully, the kind that comes from deep emptiness, not just hunger, but shame, loneliness, the sudden realization that you are entirely alone in a world that doesn't owe you kindness. He thought about knocking again. Thought about screaming, but then something stopped him. The quiet dignity of the man inside that house, his father, still held power even from behind walls. Jeremiah had always been that way. Not cruel, just silent. When his wife died, he didn't cry in public. When Marcus dropped out of college, he didn't scold him. When the family business collapsed, Jeremiah didn't blame anyone. He simply looked at life the way he looked at people, long enough for truth to reveal itself. Marcus wiped his nose on his sleeve, his chest heaving. The memory of that look came back now, that calm, measured gaze that once made him feel small even as a grown man. He used to mistake it for weakness. Now sitting in the cold, he understood it was strength, the kind built from years of holding everything together while others fell apart. He shifted slightly, the gravel biting into his legs. The moon had climbed higher, bathing the yard in soft silver light. He could see the faint outline of his father's old truck parked beside the garage. It looked exactly as it did when he was a boy, sturdy, clean, dependable. Just like him. He could also see the porch chair where Jeremiah used to sit every evening, sipping black coffee, saying little, just watching the street. Marcus remembered mocking him once, saying only old men with nothing left to do sit outside watching nothing. Now he understood. That chair had always faced the sunset. It wasn't about boredom. It was about peace. Tears welled again, uninvited. He let them fall this time. There was no one left to impress. Hours passed. The streetlights dimmed one by one, leaving only the faint glow from Jeremiah's porch lamp. It flickered softly, the light catching on the metal gate between them. Marcus's phone was dead now. His body felt heavier with each passing minute. He leaned his head against the bars again, whispering almost to himself, "I should have listened. I should have stayed." His words came out broken, swallowed by the wind. Then a sound, soft, rhythmic. Footsteps on the porch. Marcus's head shot up. The front door creaked open, and there he was, Jeremiah Cole, framed in dim amber light, his short grey beard catching the faint glow. His posture straight, his eyes unreadable. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. Marcus stood weakly, his knees trembling. "Dad, please, I'm sorry," he said, voice cracking. "I was wrong. I messed up everything. Please, just talk to me." Jeremiah watched him for a long time. The silence between them was thick enough to drown in. Finally he spoke, his voice low, calm, every word deliberate. "You threw me out, son." The sentence hit like a blow, simple, true. Marcus nodded quickly, desperate. I know, I was stupid." Jeremiah cut him off quietly. "You told me I was nothing, a burden. You called me a beggar." Each word landed slow, heavy, not angry, and just factual, like a man reading a ledger of pain. Marcus's eyes filled. "I didn't mean it, Dad. I was angry." You thought wrong," Jeremiah said softly. The silence stretched again. Jeremiah looked at him for a long time, and in that look was everything. Disappointment, hurt, and a kind of love that no longer had room to save anyone. Marcus dropped to his knees, gripping the bars. Please, I haven't eaten in 2 days. I don't have anything left. I need help." Jeremiah didn't move. His hands stayed in his pockets, his shoulders steady. "There's a shelter on Maple Street," he said at last. "They open at sunrise." Marcus blinked. "Dad? They'll feed you there," Jeremiah said, and then softer, almost a whisper. "The way you told me to eat." The line cut straight through the night. Marcus's lips parted, but no sound came out. He just stared at his father, realizing the symmetry of it all. Every cruelty returned, perfectly balanced, without rage or revenge. Jeremiah stepped back toward the door. "Take care of yourself, son." He turned, his figure framed once more by the soft light from inside the house. "Dad," Marcus called weakly. "Do you hate me?" Jeremiah paused with his hand on the doorknob. The silence lingered. Then, without turning, he said, "No, I just stopped saving a man who doesn't want to be saved." The door closed gently. Marcus sank back against the gate, eyes wide, heart broken, mind empty. The sound of the latch clicking echoed like a sentence passed. He stayed there for hours, until the night faded into a pale grey morning. And when the first bird sang, Marcus realized something. It wasn't his father who had abandoned him. It was his own pride. For the first time, he whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for the strength to live with what he'd done. Inside the house, Jeremiah sat at the kitchen table, eyes fixed on the window. The sun caught the edge of his coffee cup, steam curling upward. His face remained still, no smile, no anger, just the peace that comes when justice has spoken in silence. Dawn broke slow, stretching soft gold light over the street. The air was cool, still damp from the night. Marcus sat slumped against the iron gate, his back aching, his head heavy. He hadn't slept, not truly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw his father's face framed by the porch light, calm and steady, as if those eyes could see right through him. The morning sounds of life had begun again, sprinklers ticking, a car engine humming to life, a bird calling from the oak tree nearby. The world was moving, but Marcus wasn't part of it. His body ached for food, but his pride ached even more. His hands were filthy, his clothes wrinkled, and his voice had gone hoarse from the night's pleading. He pushed himself up to his knees. His throat was dry. He looked toward the house. The curtains were still drawn. No sign of movement. He thought about knocking again, but couldn't bring himself to. The memory of that quiet voice, "There's a shelter on Maple Street in Nassau," still lingered in his ears. His father had spoken so little, yet every word had landed like truth. No screaming, no insults, no revenge. Just calm, measured justice. Marcus wiped his face and whispered to himself, "You did this. You made this." He turned toward the street. His legs wobbled as he tried to stand. He thought maybe he'd walk to the shelter. Maybe start from there, find food, find work, try to rebuild. But as he took the first step, something stopped him, the faint creak of the porch door. He turned slowly. Jeremiah Cole stood there again, wrapped in a long brown coat. The morning light touched his face, the short grey beard glinting with dew. In one hand he held a simple brown paper bag. He walked down the porch steps without a word, each footstep soft against the wooden boards. Marcus's heart pounded. He wanted to speak, but couldn't find words that didn't sound small. Jeremiah stopped a few feet from the gate. The distance between them was still there, the same invisible wall built from years of pride, anger, and unspoken love. But this time there was something new in the air, something lighter. He placed the paper bag gently on the ground right beside the gate. Marcus stared at it, confused. "Dad, what's that?" Jeremiah's eyes lifted to meet his, calm, steady. The same eyes that had watched him grow, make mistakes, and fall apart, and still somehow held a trace of care. "Breakfast?" Jeremiah said quietly. Marcus's lips parted. He looked down at the bag. The smell of eggs, toast, and coffee wafted faintly from inside. Simple food, humble. But right now it might as well have been a feast. "You don't have to," Marcus began. But Jeremiah's silence cut him short. Jeremiah didn't move, didn't soften. He wasn't offering forgiveness. This was something else. Something that came from a place deeper than anger, deeper even than blood. Marcus stepped closer to the gate, but didn't touch it. His voice trembled. Why are you helping me?" Jeremiah looked at him for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then finally he said, Because hunger teaches what pride refuses to learn. The words hung there, heavy with truth. Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes burning. I don't deserve it, he whispered. No, Jeremiah replied softly. You don't. He turned, began to walk back toward the porch. The gravel crunched under his shoes, but halfway up the steps he stopped and spoke again, his voice low, steady. When you've eaten, go to that shelter. They'll give you work. Don't come back until you've earned peace with yourself. Marcus's tears came freely now. He nodded, though Jeremiah wasn't looking. I will, Dad. I promise. Jeremiah paused at the door, glancing back just once. Promises don't fix the past, but they can build a better tomorrow. Then he went inside, closing the door behind him. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not the cold, punishing silence of rejection. This was the quiet of healing, slow, painful, real. Marcus sank down near the gate, staring at the paper bag. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was a folded napkin, still warm toast, and a small note written in Jeremiah's neat handwriting. A man learns when he listens. Marcus pressed the note to his chest. For the first time in years, he bowed his head, not in defeat, but in humility. He took a slow bite of the toast, his body shaking as the warmth spread through him. Each chew tasted like memory, the same kind of breakfast his father used to make when he was a boy. He ate in silence, tears mixing with the salt of the bread. When he finished, he folded the napkin carefully, slipped the note into his pocket and stood. The sun had risen fully now, washing the street in gold. He turned once more toward the house, whispering softly, Thank you, Dad. Inside, Jeremiah sat by the window, watching through the curtains. He didn't smile, didn't cry. His face stayed calm, but his hand tightened once on the armrest. He'd given what needed to be given. No more, no less. Not forgiveness, but compassion. The quiet mercy of a father who still remembered what love used to mean. When Marcus finally walked away down the road, Jeremiah watched until he disappeared beyond the corner. Then he closed the curtain and whispered to himself, Maybe now he'll listen. He stood, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, and stepped onto the porch. The sunlight fell across his face, soft and warm. The world outside was alive again. Not healed, not perfect, but moving forward. For the first time in days, Jeremiah allowed himself a small exhale. It wasn't satisfaction or victory. It was release. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And sometimes it feeds the very man who once threw you out, not to save him, but to remind him of what he chose to forget. As the wind rustled the trees and the morning stretched open wide, the old man sat quietly, his cup steaming beside him, his silence saying everything words never could.